We'll start, how about we start here? So I have a few visuals for us today. Let me, okay. So first of all, if you have any questions on anything, and if you want me to answer, if you want to ask your question live, just, just use a little hand raise thing there in Zoom. Or you can just type your question into chat and I'll answer that live as well. So, please bring any questions that you have about transactional stuff, forms to use, things like that. So first, I'm going to just do a little quickie here. Here's a quick guide put out by CAR. If you're wondering what forms to use for certain properties, they have this all kind of spelled out. So you know which purchase agreement you should be using, plus purchase agreement plus addendum. So, I mean, you could basically just go right down the left-hand side here and find your particular transaction, or maybe it's the home you're going to be writing an offer on. So, single family 2 to 4 unit, including condos and ADUs. We're just using the standard RPA. Rental properties, single family or multi, they're stating you should use the residential income purchase agreement and not the RPA. That's for 1 to 4 units or 5+ units. If 1 to 4, you may also use the RPA plus the TOPA, which is the tenant occupied purchase addendum. So if there is a tenant in there that's going to be either vacating or remaining on the property post closing, you can use either one of these forms for a single family 1 to 4. Obviously non-residential is you're using commercial purchase. Vacant land, so this is urban or agricultural, it doesn't matter, even though agricultural is into the commercial side, they are using just one in zip forms. I'm not talking about air forms, the vacant land purchase agreement. So you just want to use that for all of your vacant land, even if it is agriculture. Sellers in foreclosures, I mean, they have the whole list here. I'm not necessarily going to go down all of it, but you can see that they're showing you, we don't do a lot of tenancy in common or stock cooperatives here, but we do, I see a fair amount of manufacturer come in, probably more now than years back. I think they got popular because of the price points on them. That's always going to be RPA plus the MHPA. We used to have a separate purchase agreement, but now they just kind of standardized the purchase agreement and we have these little addendums to add on. Same thing for a probate. It would be purchase addendum plus the probate addendum. So this is a great form. I can post this in the Facebook group. Again, I'm sorry it's not streaming in there. I don't know if that's just not available now or what. I'm looking for some workarounds to be able to stream these back into the Facebook groups. I know a lot of you prefer to watch it in the stream, but I could post this link in here if you're interested in just keeping this on hand for yourself. I know a lot of you store, documents and things like that for reference. This is a good quick guide for that. So now, hopefully you can still see my screen. You should see a green and white document. This one here is basically what we built our transaction checklist from. So if you are in paperless pipeline, which we'll go in there a little later, you'll see that when your transaction goes in, there might be other little supplemental lists, or when you're in the transaction, it might say that it's a mandatory item. It might say that it's broker advised. The mandatory items are basically built off of this checklist here. So this is what they are wanting to see in the file based on the transaction type and or property type. this is what they're requiring. So if a DRE auditor were to come in to the file, they generally are going to pick maybe a few agents to spot check, and they'll say, hey, send me all of these agents' files. And they're going to go through one by one and check to make sure. They're going to look at what type of property it was, type of sale it was, and see if everything is in there that would have been required. Now, not only are they checking to make sure that the documents are in there, they're checking to make sure that they were completed and that all signatures and dates and names are on each document. So if something is not fully signed, that would be, a black mark against you or whatever you want to call it. So against that file, as far as being non-compliant. So when we're asking you to update a signature or add in a date or something like that on a document, it's because this is what the DRE is handing down to us on their file audits. This is the stuff they want to see. So it's not us, being nitpicky or trying to frustrate you in any way. This is more about we're trying to keep everybody protected in case a DRE audit comes through. They look at the files and they start just black marking, all of the things wrong with certain files. So everything here in green is going to be a statutory or contractually required disclosure. So the TDS, that is a statutory disclosure. So if you get a comment on a TDS that you uploaded into our system and it's like, hey, one of the boxes in section 1 wasn't checked, or it's missing an initial or something like that, this is a statutory disclosure that is required, and it has to be 100% filled out completely, signed by everybody, listing agent, buying agent, dates, buyer, seller, everything needs to be in there 100%. That'll be a big red flag if something is not 100% on those, on the TDS. Now, whenever the TDS is required, contractually, the SPQ is required, and that's per the RPA. It's not necessarily a requirement by the state of California. It's a requirement by the residential purchase agreement put out by CAR. So now if the property is exempt from TDS, and you need to make sure, I've done exemptions webinars before on TDS exemptions and what they really are, in case you have, the other agent saying, oh, no, they're exempt. That's not always true. You want to double check that. But let's say it is legitimately exempt from TDS, then you want to put the ESD, which is the exempt seller disclosure. It's a very shortened version of the TDS and kind of the SPQ. You would just do that, and because it would be TDS exempt, the SPQ would not be required, because remember, TDS, the SPQ is only required if the TDS is required. So if the TDS was required, we are 100% going to be looking for the SPQ in the file as well. If you happen to have the exempt seller disclosure, then they are also requiring the WHS, which is a water heater and smoke detector. So they're going to want to see those two in combination in lieu of the TDS, should there be an exemption. Avids, you will see, and nobody likes to do the avid. I have my own qualms about the avid. However, it is a statutory disclosure. So it's the agent visual disclosure, and we're requiring it in the file because the DRE is requiring it. It is going to be looked for in the audit. So make sure your avid is in the file, or the other agent's avid also needs to be in the file, and it needs to be 100% signed and dated, filled out, not just check marks across everything, but actually filling out, your visual inspection of the property. ASQS or AB. So usually we get these from escrow, but they are a requirement So we need to have, you know, the FERPDA or the qualified substitute or the buyer's affidavit. So those need to be in the file. That's a statutory or contractual requirement from DRE they would be looking at. NHDs, again, this is also a statutory. This has to be in every file. You know, this is part of the civil code here. You can see. So we will be looking for not just the signature page, but we need the whole report in there as well. So we need the signature page signed by everybody and also the full report. So please just upload both in there. We look at when we're doing compliance, we look at the summary page, because what we're looking for on the summary page is this property in high or very high fire zone? And if it is, then the FHDS is going to be a requirement. That's going to be required because it's high fire. So the seller needs to fill out the FHDS, which is the fire hardening disclosure that we got a couple years ago. And then based on how that is filled out, we may or may not be requiring the certification that the home got certified from the local fire authority or whoever is certifying in that area, that the property was certified for the AB 38, the high fire. So you can see how things kind of progress, you know, with the NHD. If it is not in a high fire, if that checkbox says no, then we're not going to require the FHDS form, and we're not going to require the AB 38 form or certification. So what else do we have here? Megan's Law. Now they built this into the RPA, which is great. You will notice that it's also a broker advised item for our checklist. So being that it's built in the RPA, technically we don't need to have the DBD form signed, the Megan's Law database. However, the reason why I advise in getting this, and if you can't, that's fine, but if you're, whatever side you're representing, you should be getting this and sending it over. And if the other side, you know, is refusing to sign for whatever, because they say it's in the RPA, then that's fine. But what we're doing is bringing to attention to the buyer that, you know, there's a law with Megan's Law. You can go and search a database, things like that, because we have had some post-closing complaints come from buyers that we worked with, and they get into the house and they realize that either the house they are buying or maybe right next door is a registered sex offender. And they were extremely upset about this. So what we're doing is bringing it to attention, because, you know, we send all these documents DocuSign, and usually they're just, you know, clicking initial sign all the way through. They're not reading the RPA. So what we're just doing there is bringing it to attention that, hey, if you have an issue, if you want to search this, you need to go to this site here. So that's why it's a broker advised for us, but it is a required disclosure, but they did build it into the RPA. So for us, it is an advised item in our checklist. It's something that we try to get, and I prefer that you do get, to mitigate post-closing claims with this. Agency, obviously, that's part of the RPA package. Don't ever break up the RPA package. You know, they packaged it that way from CAR for a reason, with all those extra disclosures and advisories on top of the RPA. Have all of it signed. Don't pick and choose what you want signed, because you can see that a lot of this in here, I mean, these next 4 items are statutory or contractual. So the DRE is looking for these to be in the file. And each one of these you will see is in the RPA package, the buyer inspection advisory, the PRBS, and the Fair Appraisal Act. So those are all the statutory. So again, if you think it's, you know, we're nitpicking because you don't have, you know, the AD in there, or the buyer inspection advisory isn't signed or something like that, it's a requirement from DRE. So these are statutory and contractually required disclosures in applicable cases. So what they're doing now, so this is basically every sale, 1 to 4 unit. This is, they're going to be statutorily or contractually required based on the type of property it is or type of sale it is. Again, we have the exempt here. So if you do have a TDS exempt property, you're going to do the ESD with the WHS. So that would be required with the ESD. You can't do just the ESD. So we're going to be looking for both if there is an exemption there. FHDS, if actually obtained by the seller, the final inspection report for instruction on rebuilding, the FHDS form replaces the HHDA. So we had the HHDA for the home hardening one for a brief amount of time and they replaced it. So again, if the property is designated high fire, we are looking for FHDS to go along with that. That's going to be a requirement. This is part of the RPA package, leave that in there. So the homeowner's guide to earthquake safety booklet. This is going to be a requirement if the home is built 1960 or older. So if you're not seeing it get removed from your checklist and your home is a 1960 or older, we're going to be required. You can see this is a statutory requirement based on the age of the house that earthquake disclosure has to be filled out. It needs to be filled out by the seller, signed by the seller, signed by the buyer. So that's commercial. So protect your family from lead. So if it's built before 1978, then we're going to obviously require the lead-based paint. That is statutory. That has to be filled out, signed, 100% complete. So if the home is in 1960 or 1959, we're going to be requiring both of these, the earthquake and the lead. And that's Form LPD. Now, if the home was built before 1994, then we're looking at the WCMD. So this is only for only a requirement if the home was built before 1994. So if you see it come off your checklist and your home is a little newer, if you still get it, great. I mean, advisories are advisories and things like that. But it is going to be a requirement if it is built before 1994, that will remain on the checklist because they're looking for it. I can kind of keep going down here. So here's one I see quite often. In the RPA, if you ask for, or the buyer asked for, let's say from the listing side, asked for a termite, a WDO inspection or report, then we're going to require that in the file as well. Now, if the buyer ended up waiving it for some reason, then they need to sign the BIW. Same thing if they waive a home inspection. You know, maybe they were going to get it, now they're trying to save a few dollars or whatever the scenario is. We want to have that BIW, the buyer inspection waiver, not only signed, but they have to initial next to the inspections that they're waiving. So that's probably the most important part, is what inspection are they waiving? Or is it both? So you want to make sure that those are in place of any inspections that were waived. Now, if they filled out the buyer inspection election, the BIE, and they ticked off 3 or 4 or 5 things on there, maybe they wanted a chimney and a plumbing and, you know, all these other things, and they ended up not getting those, we're going to need the buyer inspection waiver for everything they ended up waiving that they checked off on for the buyer inspection election, because that's stating that we want to get these inspections, and then later on they change their mind. Well, a DRE auditor is going to be looking for, well, the buyer said they wanted a chimney and a plumbing and a termite and a home inspection. I only see the home inspection in the file. Where's the rest of the items? So that's how they're their brains are gonna, think when they're doing this audit. So just think anything that gets waived, we need to have the waiver in place. What else do we have here that are big ones? And again, if you guys have any questions, please throw them into the chat and I'll answer as we go. So HUD, we did do a few HUD sales. Those always require the radon gas and mold notice. They will also require the HID, which is the for your home inspection, get a home inspection. Now, when it comes to these, well, especially the HID, I have the HID on the form, on our paperless pipeline checklist as broker advised. I like to see it, on any file that you can. The more times that we can advise the client about home inspections and their duty as a buyer to satisfy themselves as to the condition of the home. I mean, we can't tell them enough, right? We're trying to mitigate post-closing claims, and so the more stuff that we can provide up front and bring to their attention and have them sign off on, the better chances we have with a post-closing claim of distancing ourselves as a company and as an agent that, we did advise them and they still didn't do it. And now they're complaining. So we want to mitigate as much as possible during the escrow process, post-closing complaints. This is why I have it as a buyer advised, because yes, the buyer inspection advisory is built into the RPA, but hey, I want to tell them one more time to, for your protection, get a home inspection. Now, technically, it's only required on HUDs and FHAs and VAs. So if you're doing a sale with FHA or VA, we're going to need to see that in the file, but I like to see it for the other ones as well, just to put your client on notice if you're on the buyer side. Obviously, if you're on the listing side and the other, the cooperating agent doesn't give you an HID, we're not going to deem you on the file. This is just something we like to have in there as much as possible. Solar, this is a new one. If the home has solar, you should be receiving a solar advisory and questionnaire from the listing side. If you're not, you need to be asking about it, because if there is solar paperwork or if there's a solar lien shown on a prelim or something like that, and this is not in the file, could be a red flag for DRE audit. So the solar is a requirement now. You can see it's in the statutory section of this document here that they provided. So be sure to get that in. And then we have all of these other advisories and disclosures. You will see most of these under the broker advised section, meaning if we can get these in here, or if they pertain to the file, like, SSIA, obviously, if you don't have a short sale, this is not going to be required. MCA, yes, we do like to see the MCA in there, because that's putting the client on notice that we don't control market conditions. We can't guarantee equity. It talks about non-contingent offers and the risk of that and things like that. So, this is a broker advised one. Yes, I definitely want to see that in the file. That's a good one to have in there. So again, if you want to have this, for reference, I can send the link. I could put it into our Facebook group. I go by this one a lot. This one, like I said, this is how we built out our checklist. So we're not really we're not requiring more. We do ask for as much as possible, because the more stuff we have, the better. But the stuff that's on there as mandatory is because it's on here for DRE audit purposes. All right, we'll go on to the next one. So this right here is right inside a CAR as well. You can Google it, or you can search it on the CAR website. This is your sales disclosure chart. And this is pretty easy one. It's a good reference one too, if you ever want to go and reference this. And again, we built the checklist off of these same things here. So what they're stating is, you know, the form down the side, you know, is there going to be a trigger for an additional disclosure, yes or no? So, and it just has it right across top here, residential 1 to 4 standard, or if it's a probate trust bankruptcy, or if it's REO foreclosure. So you can just go right down this list and go, okay, I have a residential 1 to 4 probate. I can go down here and see exactly what it is I need that is or is not required. And this could be good too, especially if this is your first time doing a probate or an REO or something like that, to know what you should be receiving from the other side, or if you are the listing agent, what you should be having, you know, your client sign and provide over to the other side. So I really like this one a lot too. This is sales disclosure chart. This is inside a car. So if you're a car member, car.org, sign in, go to search, and just type in sales disclosure chart. So that makes that one pretty easy. Hopefully you can see I have a purchase agreement up. So if you don't see the purchase agreement, please Mark, you just tell me in chat and I'll reshare my screen, but I think you can see this one. So as this is being filled out, we look at this as well as to what we're going to be removing or adding to the checklist. So if you have asked, just to kind of reiterate, for a for a fire cert or for a termite, maybe you typed in termite here, and then maybe down here you typed in clearance, and we don't see anything in a counteroffer stating that the seller is not going to provide those things, then not only will we need to see the termite report, but we'll also need to see the clearance because they were asked for in the RPA. Same thing, if you typed in a clue report or something else in here, we're going to need to see that in the file. Otherwise, you have to use that waiver form, or there needs to be an amendment, not an addendum, but an amendment to the purchase contract stating that you're no longer going to get that item performed. Same thing with home warranty. If it's waived right here, we're not going to be asking for a home warranty to be in the final closing in the transaction file. But if it's not waived and it's checked buyer or seller, we're going to need a copy of the home warranty receipt. So just keep that kind of stuff in mind as you're going through whatever is in this RPA, and you know the type of home it is, the type of sale it is. All that stuff is triggering additional or less items to be on the checklist inside paperless pipeline. And again, all we're doing is going off of, you know, the charts and things that are provided to us inside a car, and those are all done up by car legal and everything else. So do one last thing over here in paperless pipeline. So I have just a little test file up here. As you put in, now it's not 100% accurate, we're always kind of tweaking with it, but as you're inputting your transaction, if you can put in the full address, that's great. When you use just the buyer's name or something like that, it can be hard for us to locate the file when the closing package comes in. More and more lately, maybe they're trying to save paper and costs. When we're getting the closing file from escrow or title, there's sometimes that all we're getting is a check with a check stub. We're not getting the final settlement statement. We're not getting anything. So if you have just the buyer's name, or this isn't really filled out well, it's hard for us to associate the check to the actual file and who the check belongs to, because there's no agent name, there's nothing stated on there, check made out to Rise Realty. So keep that in mind, that sometimes we don't know where this this money is supposed to be allocated to because of what we're getting from escrow these days. So put in the full address of the property. Active, so you have your statuses here. You can do active prospect, maybe you're just working with a buyer, that's fine. Pending sale would be as if you just got something into escrow, you're going to put this into pending, and that'll be your status. Now these labels here can help us determine what type of property it is. So is it a manufactured? Is it a probate? Is it an REO? So if you choose one of these, then we're going to be already put on notice as an office that this is a trust sale, and there's going to be a couple extra documents we're looking for because that's what the DRE auditor is going to be looking for. So if you can also choose the correct label, that helps us as well. Now we can change that afterwards if we see that it's incorrect. But if it's just a kind of a standard sale, then you're just going to go with the standard here. Put in your close date. There's a few requirements. The contingency dates, if you put in the dates here corresponding to the transaction, to the RPA and whatever is agreed to, this is going to send you reminders. So you can use this to help you manage your file as well, because it's going to send a reminder that, hey, this is coming due. Any other info you can put in there. We do need the list price, sales price, and commission. You know, if you're requesting a CDA from us and we do not have a commission instruction, and there's no commission typed in here, we can't generate the CDA for you if we don't know how much the commission is. So please send your commission instructions to me. I will sign them. If you send them DocuSign or electronic signature, I'll get them back to you ASAP. If you send it just PDF to me, I'll have it back to you that same day, usually within a couple hours, but I have to go and sign those, sometimes manually, sometimes I have to run them through my DocuSign. So quickest response is to send your commission instructions to me with e-signature. And then if you have this information in, this just helps us in the end, and make sure that it is accurate, because if you put in commission was $30,000, but then the price got adjusted at some point, maybe at the end, or some sort of credit happened, and now the commission's only 25,000, and if you didn't update this and there's no commission instruction, all we can do as an office is assume that the commission is still 30,000. So unless we see some sort of commission amendment. So these are things that you can do to help us work with you in getting the files, processed a lot faster, and that we're not nitpicking the file. All we're doing is going by the checklist and the disclosure charts that CAR has provided us, CAR Legal, and that's what you see down here. So you'll see that this was put in as a pending transaction, so it automatically assigned the mandatory checklist for that. And you're going to find stuff on here that does not pertain to your transaction. And that's because this is somewhat of a general checklist. It would be far too confusing to make a checklist for every single type of transaction and every type of scenario there could be. So what we have here is a general one. Maybe you only had a seller multiple or a seller counter, then we're going to delete off these other ones. Obviously, we're not going to be requiring these, but these are just here in case you did get multiple counter offers going back and forth. Other things that will be deleted off if they don't pertain could be the contingency of purchase or the SIP. Now, sometimes we leave those on until the end of the transaction because many times towards the end of the transaction, things happen. The seller needs to stay in for an extra couple days all of a sudden, or now the buyer has decided that it needs to be contingent, and you are able to, get that thrown back into the purchase. So some of these kind of remain on until the end of the transaction because we want to make sure that they did or did not happen. If you upload, you'll see right up front at the top, we're asking for the MLS sheet and the tax sheet, which is just a CRS report. You could get that straight from MLS as well. We're asking for both of those because if you upload those right away, we can tell right away what type of transaction this is, and we can modify the checklist right away based on the type of sale, type of ownership, so on and so forth. So if you upload the MLS sheet and we see that the home was built in 1970 and and it has an HOA, then we're going to add in the HOA supplemental checklist, which is just going to be a little short one. And what would be required is the BHAA, which is the advisory for the buyer for that the home is in a HOA. PSD, we have it as if applicable because not every HOA has parking and storage requirements that need to be disclosed. Usually in condos, yes. Townhomes a lot of the time, but there's not always parking restrictions in some of these HOAs. So this is on there, but it doesn't mean it's going to be required. It's going to be if applicable. And then we will want to see, this comes from escrow at the end, signed CC&R approval. That's something that they do on their end, that they have the buyer sign when they're signing, all their escrow docs. That's one of the things that gets signed if there is an HOA. So you can always get that from escrow as well. So again, a lot of this stuff, it says mandatory, but if you actually read what it says, it'll say mandatory ESD, but only if it's TDS exempt, then we want the ESD. So if we see that this is going to need a TSD, then we're going to remove this ESD requirement. So you can kind of see how, the transaction checklist is a little bit fluid, and we can only do so much on our end if we don't have some of the basic information up front about the MLS, the MLS sheet and the CRS report. That'll help us dwindle down this list right away. And then the other thing we look at is the RPA. Was there a termite, asked for? Was there a termite clearance asked for? Anything else that was asked for? Was there, is it an entity signer? Because the RCSD form might be required. So we're looking for additional clues inside the RPA that will either remove or add things to your checklist here. If it's an FHA or VA, the FVAC form, that's a statutory, that has to be in the file. And it 100% will be signed by the buyer at some point. Sometimes escrow gets it done, sometimes the lender gets it done. It doesn't necessarily need to be the CAR form, FVAC, but we just need that form. Even if it's the lender form, we need that in the file because that is a requirement. And we will also look for the HID if it is a FHA or VA loan. As it goes down, again, you'll start seeing things get removed here. If it was not assigned, you may see this assignment addendum stay on your checklist until towards the end. And if we see that there was no assignment of the contract made, then obviously that gets deleted. If there were no, amendments or addendums, if there was no intent to exchange, these items get removed. So this checklist looks a little daunting in the beginning, but you can bet that probably about a quarter of it's going to get removed just because it's not going to pertain to your sale. Same thing on the title escrow side. We have the mandatory items, EMD receipt, got to have that. Page 16 with the escrow signature and information in there, got to have that. There's some amendments and stuff. Sometimes there are no escrow amendments during the transaction, so these will be deleted. You can see they say if applicable. So if we get to the end and you're ready to get your CDA, then we'll check those off. We'll see that there was no other amendments, but if there are, please add them in. And with that, just a reminder, it does go out every month. There is a transaction checklist reminder to upload any files you have and things like that. That's just to compliance email that goes out once a month from us to everybody. We're not targeting anybody specifically. There's also instructions in there on how to request a CDA, but it's literally this easy. If you go to note email, you're gonna send it to Anahid. It has me in here as a listing agent, but or me. So for the staff, it'll be Anahid and me would be best. And just click CDA request and final audit. If you have any TC fees or any notes, please just add them in right here. We already have this templated out. And then just press send email, and we're going to get notified that you're ready for a CDA at that point. And then we're going to go into the file and we're going to look for all of the mandatory things to make sure they're uploaded and everything was signed correctly. You know, some of the stuff, if the VP is not in there, you know, the final verification of property condition, if that's not in there, obviously we don't have a final settlement statement yet. So there could be a few straggling things that are kind of towards the end there. If they're not in the file, we're still going to issue the CDA, but all of the mandatory stuff, all the disclosures and things that should have been signed before the contingency was released, we are definitely going to need all of that stuff, plus all your stuff from escrow. So, and then we'll go ahead and issue the CDA. But again, make sure you have at least the commission instructions in there so we can verify the commission amount, things like that. Any notes you have about transaction coordinator fees, how much they are, where they should be sent. All of those notes in the file help us create an accurate CDA the first time. If it is inaccurate for whatever reason, just reply back and we'll get it corrected. That does happen occasionally. So hopefully that sheds some light a little bit on, you know, some of the stuff that we require on the files, why we require them, and resources on where you can go to research yourself to make sure you're staying compliant throughout the transaction. You know, it's not just about getting through and doing the minimal to get your check at the end. You don't ever want to do that because that's the kind of stuff that gets you in trouble, and that's where we get post-closing complaints. You know, as you're going through the transaction and you're hearing, you know, things that your buyer is concerned about, things the listing agent states about the property, you know, is that triggering another advisory that you should probably put into the file? You know, you always want to think about risk reduction as you're going through your transaction and not just how can I do the minimum so that I can get paid at the end, you know, because that's when we run into file compliance issues and also sometimes post-closing complaints. So keep that in mind. Always give us a call if you have questions on anything. If you make your notes in here, you know, if we're requiring something on here or something's left on the checklist that you weren't able to obtain, then just send us a note. If for some reason the cooperating broker is refusing to sign something or provide something, I know that that does happen sometimes. Individual offices have their policies. We have difficult sellers. There's all kinds of scenarios that pop up here and there about why something didn't get signed or provided. Then we need in here a PDF copy of maybe an email thread, a text exchange, something like that, showing that the other side was not providing, they're unwilling to provide, whatever it is. But that way there we have documentation of why we did not obtain a certain thing that may have been a statutory or contractual requirement per the DRE. So that at least, you know, it doesn't make the file compliant necessarily, but it at least shows that we made our valiant attempts to get this signed. They were refusing, and our client was notified of their rights because they didn't get it signed or whatever. So that's what you do in the instances of, you know, I couldn't get this signed for whatever reason. So just upload the PDF so we all have documentation of that kind of stuff. So I didn't see any questions come in, but if you want to ask, you know, on a phone call or something like that, because you don't want to post it in the chat, that's fine. I'm always around. If you want to shoot me an email, that's fine. These links I can post in the Facebook group in case you want access to these documents. they're a great little PDF to keep around so that you can make sure you're doing your best with your client as you're going through your transaction. You can look at, the quick guide, which RPA should I be using? You can look at the sales disclosure checklist to make sure you're getting the correct disclosures together for your listings, or you're receiving the correct disclosures when you're on the buyer representation side. So I'll post those up in the Facebook group. So hopefully you're a member of the company Facebook group. I'll post them in the comments section under the notification of the meeting from today. So that way there'll be a couple of them in there, and I'll post them on that so that you have them. They're great to have handy. I have these open on my computer literally like all day long. So other than that, hopefully that was informative, not too boring and dry. I know it kind of is sometimes with compliance things, but just to know that we are on your side when we're getting these checklist requirements fulfilled and paperless pipeline. These are just things we're looking out for everybody. We're looking out for you. We're looking out for the brokerage. And we're trying to make sure that we can have the cleanest DRE audit possible with having compliant files and protecting our clients and ourselves. So again, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, hope you have a great week and we'll talk to you soon.